President. Please be seated. The chamber is now back in session, and I give the floor to the Defense Counsel for for Nunji to continue putting questions to the civil party. You may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Civil Party, I wanted to move on now to a different topic, and it's one that you've already talked about for some time this morning and afternoon, and that is your escape from the Southwest Zone soldiers. So first I would like to put to you a quote from your civil party application and then ask you some questions about that. Mr. President, that is E3/4950 at the ERNs 00550646 in Khmer, 01057923 in English, and 00895317 in French. And this is the quote, Mr. Civil Party. Quote, "My right arm was injured and became paralyzed. My hands were then bound behind my back. The other soldiers' hands were also tied up." And then you continue a little later to say, quote, "I tried to untie my arms. I managed to free myself and help 2 more people escape." Unquote. My first question is it correct that you managed to untie yourself and 2 other people?
At that time, the person who tied my hand up kicked me in the chest, and I told him that the string was too tight and I found it difficult to breathe. So along the way that I was walked, I could move my arm a little bit looser. So that was what happened. And after I untied myself, I helped untie the hand of the comrades that I knew. And in fact, when we tried to escape, the 2 other people escaped still with their hand tied up. And I untied their hands along the way when we escaped.
Thank you, Mr. Civil Party. As you described in your civil party application, your right arm was injured and unfortunately became paralyzed. Now, I'm sorry if this is a sensitive question, but my question is, when you were hit on the arm that night, did your arm become paralyzed immediately, or could you still use it on the night of your arrest?
The one who got injured was the one who escaped with me. As for me, I was bitten with the butt of the gun. It was the one who escaped with me that who got injured. And as for me, my right hand was bitten with the butt of a gun and it became paralyzed.
I think my question may have been unclear. That's what I was asking you about your arm being beaten with the butt of a rifle and then becoming paralyzed. My question about that is, on the night of your arrest, did your arm become paralyzed straight away, or could you still use it that night?
I could still use it, but it was numb. But somehow I could still use it. I could still use it for about 70%, but it was not like a normal arm.
Thank you, Mr. Civil Party. Now, this morning at 10:09, you described how there were, I think you said 6 or 7 Southwest Zone soldiers guarding you and the other 29 arrested East Zone soldiers. And I believe that you said they were holding AK-47s. What I wanted to know is, how did you untie yourself and then later the other soldiers without your guards noticing that that had happened?
When we were taken out to be killed, it was nighttime, and we sat down close to each other. The guard was about 3 meters away from me. So at that time when I tried to untie my hands, they could not see it because it was nighttime. I released my hand from the string, and then the 3 of us escaped, while the other 2 who escaped with me still had their hand tied up. And as for those who could not escape, they were shot dead with their hands still tied up.
Thank you. And you've said today and in your application that after you ran away, the Southwest Zone soldiers chased you. How many soldiers chased you?
There were 3 of them who chased us behind. And as for the other guards, they were busy shooting at those who still had their hands tied up. The other Khmer soldiers were still busy shooting the other detainees who could not escape. President, Mr. Civil Party, could you please speak slower because your speaking need to be interpreted into English and other language.
Mr. Civil Party, so the Southwest Zone soldiers chased you for how long?
They chased us for about 40 meters, and then we reached the bank of the river. And they kept shooting at us for about 10 minutes, and we managed to cross to the other side of the river. And we kept running forward.
Okay, I just have a side question now about the 2 people that you were with when you escaped. I think that you just said a few moments ago that you didn't untie them straight away, but you untied them during the escape. My question is, did you untie them before or after you all jumped into the river?
when the 4 people were taken to be killed first, the other 2 guards whom I knew asked me to help untie their hands, and I told them that I could not untie them now because I was still trying to untie my own hands first, and after I untie my own hands, I would help to untie their hands. So when we heard the order from the guards who took away the 4 people to be killed, and then we heard the sound of beating, and we heard the sound of scream. So after each of the 4 people were killed, they walked back to take us, but we shout to each other to escape, and then they started shooting at us. So we escaped only after we heard the scream of the 4 people who were being killed. And we became very shocked. So I tried my best to untie my hand, and I told the others to run to escape. And the guards was on the east side. They pointed the gun at us, and we escaped to the west side. So the 3 of us managed to escape while the rest were killed. Only 3 of us managed to escape and survive the ordeal.
Thank you, Mr. Civil Party. I'm now going to move away from that night to talk to you about armed conflict between Vietnam and Cambodia. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about this armed conflict during the Democratic Kampuchea period. First of all, I wanted to start with something you said earlier this morning. At 9:40, you described how there was fierce fighting in Romis Hak along the border. And you also mentioned, I believe, that Bavet and National Road 1 were very hot battlefields. My first question in this regard is, do you remember in which month or months in 1976 there was fierce fighting at Romis Hak?
The fighting took place in dry season, in harvesting season. The fighting mostly took place in harvesting season. It was in late 1977. Correction from interpreter, late 1976.
Thank you, Mr. Civil Party. And then it's the same question about Bavet. Do you remember in which month or months in 1976 was Bavet a hot battlefield?
I did not remember the exact months. It was perhaps after the Khmer New Year. It was in dry season. The battlefield took place one after another, subsequently one after another from Romihai and then 2 other battlefields.
Thank you, Mr. Civil Party. Just a question for clarification. Okay, my understanding is that the rainy season begins in mid to late in the mid to late part of every year. And then Khmer New Year, as I recall, is in April, which is the first half of the year. So you said Bavet was a hot battlefield, perhaps after Khmer New Year, but still in the dry season. Does it sound correct to you to say that this is approximately in mid-1976?
Yes, it was about that time. The fighting took place in dry season. It was the fighting and it was the attack and counter-attacks. I did not remember the exact months it was. So the fighting lasted from 1976 until 1977.
Thank you. And just the same question again about the third location that you mentioned, which was National Road 1. Do you remember in which month or months in 1976 was National Road 1 a hot battlefield?
President, Mr. Civil Party, please hold on. The floor is given to the International Deputy Co-Prosecutor.
Thank you, Your Honour. Perhaps this is just a question for clarification. National Road 1's quite a long road, and I think the witness gave it a location on National Road 1, but in any event, because it's such a long road, I'd just ask Counsel perhaps if you could specify which part.
Thank you, Mr. Prosecutor. That was actually going to be my next question, but I can ask it now. Mr. Civil Party, you had mentioned that National Road 1 was a hot battlefield in 1976. Can you tell us any specific locations along that road that were hot battlefields?
The fighting occurred in Bawat city, to the north of the city. And it's also occurred in Svai Sejing, to the south of the city. They chased us. So the fighting took place at that two locations. They were the battlefields.
Thank you, Mr. Civil Party. And just one last question on this topic before we move on to the next one. Do you remember any other hot battlefields in 1976?
There was another battlefield in Svai Rieng province in Kampong Ro district. They were also fighting with the Vietnamese soldiers who already entered Khmer territory. And it was also a hot battlefield. And there were a number of soldiers from Division 4 who were killed, and only about 100 of them survived that battlefield.
Thank you very much, Mr. Civil Party. I'm moving to my next topic now, and we're going back to the night of your arrest with the Southwest Zone forces. But what I would like to talk about now is you crossing the Vietnamese-Cambodian border. So my first question relates to something that you said this morning at 10:12. I believe that you said that after walking for the whole night, you arrived at the border with Vietnam. And you then said that you came across some Khmer Rouge soldiers there at the border who fired at you, but that you were helped by Vietnamese soldiers who fired back. My first question is just to know if I understood your testimony correctly on this point.
Yes, we kept running the whole night. And when it's dawn time, we crossed the border into Vietnam. But when we tried to cross the border, we encountered the Khmer Rouge soldiers there. And I approached them in order to ask for rice to eat because we were very hungry, and it was I alone who approached them while the other two who accompanied me were still behind. And when I approached them, I saw that it was the Vietnamese soldiers, not the Khmer Rouge soldiers. And the Khmer Rouge soldiers tried to shoot at us, while the Vietnamese soldier tried to shoot back at the Khmer Rouge soldier to save us. The Khmer Rouge soldiers shot it 3 times at me, but the bullets missed me, and my life was saved by the Vietnamese soldier because the Vietnamese soldier shot back at the Khmer Rouge soldiers to cut the Khmer Rouge soldier from moving further to catch us.
Thank you, Mr. Civil Party. Do you happen to know what the location where you crossed the border was called?
At that time, we had no commanders because his own commanders had already been removed, and we had no ideas which Khmer Rouge soldiers, which unit those Khmer Rouge soldiers belong to. I mean the Khmer Rouge soldiers at the border who shot at us. We had no ideas whether they came from which zone. But at the time, I want to clarify that at the time that I escaped, the soldiers, the East Zone soldiers, no longer had any commanders because their commanders had already been removed.
Thank you, Mr. Civil Party. Concerning you crossing over to the border and the Vietnamese soldiers seeing you, I have a question, and that is, did you make some kind of signal to the Vietnamese soldiers that you were not an enemy? So, I don't know, for example, waving a white flag, putting your hands on your head, putting your hands in the air. Did you do anything like that?
I did not give them any signal. Perhaps the Vietnamese soldiers saw that we were wearing only shorts, and the shorts that we were wearing could be a communicative signal to the Vietnamese soldiers. The Vietnamese soldiers perhaps understood that we were trying to flee from the Khmer Rouge soldiers, and that's why the Vietnamese soldiers shot at the Khmer Rouge soldiers who tried to chase us.
Thank you. Just based on that answer, I wanted to confirm. So You said that after you crossed into Vietnamese territory, you were then interrogated by Vietnamese soldiers. Did the Vietnamese soldiers tell you why they didn't shoot at you?
The Vietnamese did not ask me such questions. They simply asked me about what had happened to me. They asked me which unit I came from and what rank I held. And when I was in Vietnam, I did not dare to tell them my biography, that is about my role in the special unit. I simply told them that I was an ordinary combatant. They asked me about the unit I belong to and about the situation in the country and about why the Khmer Rouge killed their own soldiers. I told through the interpreter that there were fighting between Khmer Rouge soldiers and we tried to escape from that fighting. They asked me how many of us escaped into Vietnam, and then I told them 3 of us, but 2 got lost along the way. And later on I found out that the Vietnamese asked 3 of us separately, and the answer that 3 of us gave were the same. We told them that we were taken off our clothes and we had only shorts with us wearing. So all the 3 of us wore only shorts. And on our bodies there were dirt, water and mess, because we collected this dirt on our body as we tried to escape.
Thank you for your answer. So just focusing now on the interrogation that you had with the Vietnamese soldiers, a few questions. My first question is, did the Vietnamese soldiers speak Khmer?
The Vietnamese soldier had a Khmer interpreter. Perhaps the interpreter was a Khmer Cambodia Kraum. So they gave the interpretation for us during the interrogation.
Thank you. And then I think earlier on today you said that the Vietnamese told you about the fate of East Zone cadres and soldiers. Did I hear you correctly?
I could not get your question clearly.
Sorry about that, Mr. Civil Party. I think I recalled you saying during your testimony earlier today that when the Vietnamese soldiers interrogated you, they also told you about what had happened to East Zone soldiers and cadres. Did I hear you correctly on this point?
The Vietnamese soldier asked me, and I gave my answer accordingly, that the East Zone soldiers were arrested, and the story, and all the story as I told you earlier, that East Zone soldiers were arrested and taken away to be killed. Some of the soldiers were killed, and some managed to escape, and as in my case, I managed to escape. So that was what I told to the Vietnamese soldiers when they asked me.
Just another similar question. I think I heard you say earlier today that the Vietnamese asked you if you wanted to be a soldier again, and then you eventually joined the Liberation Army. Did I hear you correctly on that point?
Yeah, after they took us to the inner side of Vietnam and they clean and put the bandage on our wound, and after I spent one night sleeping there, and then they asked me whether I was interested in joining the Liberation Army. And they said that if I joined the Liberation Army, they would have trust in me and they would let me free. But if I rejected, I would be detained for about half month or 1 month before I would be released. So I and the other fellows agreed to join the Liberation Army. And in the next morning, we were taken to join the army.
So where did they take you?
I was brought to join the group in Long Batum, east of Ho Chi Minh, the resident for Khmer people and those who were supported by the Vietnamese to become soldiers. We met each other at Long Bating and then we went to Long Ya, after which we were given weapons. Only when I arrived at Long Ya, I was given with weapons. First, I got to go to Long Batin and then I went to Long Yao, where I was given with weapons in 1978.
Thank you, Mr. Civil Party. And now we're nearly at the end of my questions. Thank you for your patience. I have some questions now about your time in the Liberation Army. So you've talked about going to different locations and them giving you weapons. Did you receive training in preparation for your role in the Liberation Army?
After I was equipped with weapons, it was at Long Yao. The leader of a division instructed me and advised me that I was part of the Liberation Army and I had to liberate the country. I should not use violence to retaliate. I do not have to get grudge at other people and not to kill Khmer people. And I was told that the Vietnam had war for 30 or 40 years. They never killed their own people, and Khmer only had war for a period of for a few years, but over 3 million people were killed. My superior at the time advised me of the issues that I had to be lenient, and my chief were moved to Kampong Cham and Bang to Svai Rieng, and in fact at the time I was advised not to kill Khmer people, and I was instructed if I killed my own people, so who else would be remain living in the Cambodia. And after that time, I did not get grudge at other people because I was advised and instructed by my superior.
Thank you. So you received instructions not to kill or hurt ordinary Cambodian people, I take it. As a member of the Liberation Army, did you fight against soldiers of the Revolutionary Army of Kampuchea?
when I came back, I encountered with the Khmer Rouge forces. So I was engaged in the fighting against Khmer Rouge forces. Some of the soldiers died. It was normal in the battlefield, and some others got injured, and they were treated. Some ordinary people were released to go to see their family after they were seized or captured. As I said, ordinary people were captured and kept for a few days, and if they had relatives living close by, we would send them back to see their family. And for the soldiers, particularly for soldiers who were arrested, we gave them meal and water to drink, and if there were requests to have them to see their family, we would release them. For example, in Bat Dambong, we arrested 30 or 40 soldiers and kept at a Christian church, and they were kept there for a week, after which the families came to see them and made the request to have them back home. So we released them after we had the request. And as I said, the soldiers who got injured were treated by all of us. For people living in the cooperative or living at bases, I do not know what happened to them. I knew only what happened to the soldiers who were engaged in the fighting.
Thank you, Mr. Civil Party. I think I heard you mention 3 different locations, maybe I'm wrong, Kampong Cham, Svaireng, and Battambang. In any case, my question is, where were you engaged in fighting with the forces of the Revolutionary Army of Kampuchea while you were a member of the Liberation Army?
First, I arrived at Memut, and then I went to Kampong Cham at Tunlebat, west of Tunlebat, and there was a intense fighting at the time at Tunlebat, and only after the area bombing by the Vietnamese army that the battlefield ended. So again, it was a hot and intense fighting at Tunlebat. Then I had to move to Kampong Thom, but it was a small-scale fighting, and the same happened in Siem Reap and Serai Sapon. I was also called to join the fighting in Bat Dambong. In Bat Dambong, the Liberation Army, together with the Vietnamese soldier, could not defeat the Khmer Rouge soldiers at the time. My troops were asked to attack from the west, and we were attacking from the west, and the Khmer Rouge forces at the time were defeated. The Khmer Rouge were defeated on the 30th in the afternoon. So we seized 4 provinces after the fighting. The Battambang and Kampong Cham battlefields were intense intense ones.
Did I just hear you mention the 30th?
I did not say 30th. I said 1979.
Okay. In this case, my question is just, do you remember maybe more specifically which months this fighting took place when you were a member of the Liberation Army fighting against the Revolutionary Army of Kampuchea?
On 2nd December, I was engaged with the Front Army. I arrived at Memut on the 1st January 1979, my army reached Memot Kampong Cham. We were stationed at Memot Kampong Cham on the 1st January 1979, and the front army was founded. The front army arrived at Memot on 2nd December, and from that time onward, we started our campaigns of fighting.
So just to be clear, the front army arrived in Memut on the 2nd of December 1978 and then subsequently began fighting on the 1st of January 1979. Is that correct?
The army arrived on that date, and then we started the fighting up from that date onward.
Thank you. I'm almost finished. Just a few last questions. Earlier on, I believe that you mentioned that the Liberation Army received support from the Vietnamese military, which conducted aerial bombing at one point. Did I hear you correctly?
That is true. At the time, we had nothing, said the witness, and there were joint forces of Vietnamese and Cambodian, but fewer Vietnamese than Cambodian. That was the real situation. Vietnamese soldiers arrested Khmer Rouge forces alive, but that the opposite way around for Khmer Rouge. They arrested Vietnamese, and Vietnamese soldier died. In fact, there were more Vietnamese soldiers in my army, and in a company there were only 3 or 4 Cambodian soldiers at the time, and the rest were Vietnamese soldiers.
Thank you, Mr. Civil Party. So if I understood you correctly, Vietnam also played a role in the military campaign carried out by the Liberation Army against the Revolutionary Army of Kampuchea. Perhaps you may be unable to answer this question, but I'm wondering, when you were part of the Liberation Army, did you ever have the occasion to hear about Vietnam's foreign policy intentions for Cambodia?
Concerning foreign policy of Vietnam, in fact, they joined the forces with Cambodian, and they had a good collaboration with the Cambodian forces, but I did not know what their intention behind toward Cambodia. They made a mention about the movement resistant together with the Cambodian forces from the past, and soldiers had died. And I do not know how deep the relation between the two forces was at the time. During the study sessions, we were informed about the solidarity that we had in the past period. I do not have the detailed information in relation to the foreign policy of Vietnam, and I cannot tell you about the intention behind the Vietnamese.
Thank you very much, Mr. Civil Party, for your patience today. I have no further questions.
President, thank you. And the floor is now given to the defense team for Mr. Khieu Samphan to put questions to the civil party. You may proceed.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président. Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Mr. Chun Samon. My name is Anta Gise. I am International Co-Counsel for Mr. Kyo Sampan, and it is in this capacity that I'll put a few follow-up questions to you. You have stated that when you were in the special unit, part of your time was devoted to gathering intelligence on the position of Vietnamese enemy troops, and that when it was necessary and when you so wished, you could also take part in fighting whenever there were confrontations. My question to you, therefore, is as follows. When you took part in confrontations, who was your chief at the time when you were fighting? Was it still Huo, the chief of your unit, or someone else took over from him whenever there was fighting?
When I was engaged in the battlefield, we were working in group, and 3 of us in one group. And one person would be assigned to be chief of, for example, a platoon or a company. So usually a group of 3 would be, and a person in a group of 3 would be responsible for that group. And we were instructed to participate in the fighting all at once, and also when a bullet was shot, we had to shoot all together. In fact, we had chiefs of platoons or companies, but we have one man supervisor for the platoons and companies. As I said, there were 3 of us, for example, in a platoon or a company, and one was the chief who was responsible and supervising for the platoon or the company. If one was injured, that company or platoon had to withdraw. At the time, Khmer Rouge did not use many forces to be engaged in the fighting. At one fighting, only 15 soldiers at most were assigned to be engaged in the fighting.
Dans le cadre de votre réponse,
In your answer, you have just stated that whenever there was shooting, you had to respond. Who issued you the orders to respond? Was it a general order, or it depended on the situation on the ground?
They set a time when we were assigned to go into fighting. In fact, at the time, they had known already about the weaknesses and the strength of the enemies. For example, if there was a shot, if we could hear a shot, for example, at 10 or 11, we had to start the fighting. And usually the fighting lasted for 10 or 15 minutes. And the fighting usually starts at 1 a.m. or 5 a.m. in the morning. The fighting usually started after midnight at 1 a.m., 2 a.m. or 4 a.m. In the morning. Fighting never started in the afternoon. Again, the fighting most of the time started at 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning, and soldiers had to wait for the signal of a gunshot, and if we heard the gunshot, we had to immediately engage in the fighting.
et concrètement sur place.
And concretely, on the ground, who gave the signal for you to retaliate, to shoot back? Who decided that you could shoot back?
For example, if I was in a platoon, I had a chief, and I would wait for the signal from that chief of the platoon. So a person would be assigned to be the commander of the combatants, and we had to wait for the signal from that commander. So the particular individual, for example, Mr. A or B, would be assigned by the commander, the higher commander, to be in charge of the combat.
Et en 76,
In 1976, in that area, who was at the head of the hierarchy in the zone in which you were?
In 1976, Sun was my superior. I was a part of the regiment 112 at the time, and my superior was Sun.
est-ce que je dois comprendre de votre...
Should I understand from your answer that apart from Sun, you did not receive any orders from another person?
I received orders from Sun and Sat, who was the deputy. The group of three, Sun and Sat, another one, were giving orders. So I was working with him in the general staff, that is in the regiment 112. I would inform him about forces, and they would assign the soldiers accordingly in the regiment 112.
Et c'était la personne qui avait le grade.
Was the person who had the highest rank, that is a person you knew in your regiment, that is 112?
He was commander of a regiment, and Sat was the deputy. There was another deputy whom I could not recall the name. Sun was the major or the main commander of regiment 112.
Au sujet des combats que...
As regards the fighting you engaged in that area, did you always fight against Vietnamese troops, or you fought against other types of groups?
In 1976 up to 1977, I was part of a soldier, and I was always engaged in the fighting against the Vietnamese. The whole country had been liberated after 1976, so I had to engage in the fightings against the Vietnamese troops in order to defend the country.
Tout à l'heure, répondant...
A while ago, in answer to a question put to you by Judge Laving, you stated that you never participated in the arrest of Vietnamese during the period in which you engaged in fighting in that area. Did I properly understand your testimony?
the battlefields that, in fact, I never encounter or arrest any Vietnamese soldier at the battlefields that I was assigned to be part of. I never come across the Vietnamese and then arrest them. But in the battlefield, I encountered Vietnamese soldiers.
Et sur le champ de bataille, vous vous êtes...
And on the battlefront, you confronted one another, but there were no arrests of Vietnamese troops by the forces you belong to, nor Khmer Rouge troops by the Vietnamese troops facing you, with whom you were confronted. Is that what I should understand from your testimony?
No arrests were made alive. However, there were many casualties, both from the Cambodian side and Vietnamese side, and the soldiers were never arrested alive.
Peut-être pour plus de précision, vous, de votre...
Perhaps for purposes of further clarification, in the group or the unit in which you fought, were there any Khmer Rouge combatants that you knew to have been captured by Vietnamese troops? Did you have any personal knowledge of the capture of soldiers like yourself who were captured, or you never had any such case?
In my unit back then, all of us trusted the Communist Party of Cambodia, or CPK. We were absolute that we did not want the Vietnamese forces to arrest us. We rather died than being arrested. There was instructions from the CPK, and we were told to be absolute. We were informed by the party that soldiers, after arrested, were disemboweled, and the grass would stuff into our abdomen. So the Vietnamese forces during the times were never arrested by the Vietnamese. So we were absolute in our stance that we did not want the Vietnamese forces to arrest us, and we would keep one bullet to shoot ourselves if we knew that we would be arrested. We would die anyway if we were arrested, as we were told. So we rather died than being arrested alive.
Donc je comprends de votre réponse.
So I understand from your answer that you did not experience any situation in which persons from your camp were arrested by Vietnamese. Is that the case?
That is correct.
Donc en fait, si je comprends...
Which means, as a matter of fact, if I understand you correctly, that when you were fighting with the Khmer Rouge, when Judge Laving questioned you on what happened whenever Vietnamese were arrested, you yourself was never a direct or eyewitness of the arrest of Vietnamese. So you never knew what happened to those Vietnamese troops. Isn't that the case?
That is correct.
Monsieur le Président, je vois qu'il est...
Mr. President, I see the time is 4 p.m. I have obviously not completed my examination of the civil party. I think I'll complete it tomorrow.
បាទអរគុណ
President, thank you, Mr. Civil Party. It is now time for the adjournment, and the Chamber will resume its hearing tomorrow on Wednesday, 29 June 2016 at 9 a.m. Tomorrow, the Chamber will continue hearing the Civil Party Chun Samon and then proceed to hear 2 TCW 917. Please be informed and please be on time. I'm grateful to you, Mr. Chun Samon. The hearing of your testimony as a civil party has not come to an end yet. You are therefore invited to be here and come to and testify once again tomorrow. Court officer, together with the vessel, please send Mr. Chun Samon back to the place where he is staying at the moment, and please invite him back into the courtroom to testify tomorrow at 9 a.m. Security personnel are instructed to bring Nguyen Chien Kiew Sampon back to ECC's detention facility and have them return into the courtroom tomorrow before 9 a.m. The court is now adjourned.